Applied behavioral science, we talked about a lot, still very undefined. And I'm trying to help to put some definition to the field. And I started a group called the Applied Behavioral Scientist with a few other leaders in the field of trying to really set out what are some standards around what actually makes this field. I think that some people may have seen the data science Venn diagram, which, if I remember correctly, it has machine learning, programming and statistical capabilities is kind of fits what a data scientist is. I feel like there was a seismic shift once it actually was like, oh, there's a way to define this thing that everybody is so excited about, and I'm hoping we can do the same thing. And in the interim, I've created my own Venn diagram for applied behavioral science, and I think the three pieces are mixed methods research. We talked about that. I'll touch on it again. Uh, Domain expertise at the expertise, which is understanding the behavioral science principles and understanding how the various concepts and how they come together. I'll touch on that a little bit more. It also, I believe, includes having at least one industry expertise. And again, I can touch on that a little bit more, but I think that it's because behavioral science is very domain specific. Health behavioral science has its own intricacies, just as labor behavioral science does. And then the last piece is communication. And I'll start there with saying communication is such an important piece for any researcher, but it's especially important for an applied behavioral science researcher because, as I said, I do see it in many ways as being this applied social scientist. And I have seen so many academic articles passed around businesses that people may just read the abstract, if anything, and that's it. And it's because there is the average person doesn't have the time or the desire to dive into the deep jargon that's needed to be able to understand the average social science journal article. So the role of the applied behavioral scientist is to read that paper and then distill the most actionable insights. I truly believe that you lose people when you can't distill a set of insights into one PowerPoint slide. I think and maybe I started my career in consulting, and so maybe that's a little bit of a bias, all about the slide presentations. But that is my focus. Is I need to get at least one, if not two or three insights onto that one slide, and if I can't do that, I doubt that people are going to really care that much, or even more. Maybe they'll care, but I doubt it will actually be actionable. So communications, one of those pieces of the Venn diagram. As I said, mixed methods is the next, and we already kind of described what mixed methods is, but the piece that I'll hit on significantly is that the applied behavioral scientist has to be able to choose what is the best way to approach a research project, and then even more so has to be able to make the trade-offs that are required of doing research in an applied setting. And I think that or I should say, what I see commonly happen is academics that they'll go and get a PhD, maybe do a postdoc, and then they'll come to a company and be like, how do I get any research done? I have too tight timelines. I have the inability to actually control the environment. And it's because the realities is I have never seen a full scale RCT be done by in-house researchers. I've seen it as collaborations between professors and in-house researchers, but the average in-house researcher doesn't have the resources to do an academic level research project. And that's just the reality of it. It's because companies are not intended to create perfect level new knowledge. They're intended to make money. And so for that reason, I should say, yeah, an applied behavioral scientist or a mixed method researcher has to be able to make those trade offs and say, okay, I have 6 months to get this done. Well, I'm going to have to throw out some of the things that are the gold standards of RCTs right away. And now, with those 6 months, I have to make the trade offs that maybe I'll be able to control these variables, or I'll be able to collect this sample. Maybe with 6 months I can do a random sample, but I'm still going to have sampling bias here or there, and there's a lot of these trade-offs. So the more that an individual, it comes with experience and with education to just be able to understand what is the best that I can do with the constraints that I have. And I'll touch just briefly on the ethics piece of this because that's a question that comes up a lot. Is will they say, well, if you're doing that, then you're creating bad information. And I think we could have a scientific debate all day on creating evidence and creating research. But my rule of thumb, my ethical guideline is if I'm creating knowledge that is better than nothing, then I feel I'm doing all right. And so I want to make sure I don't create knowledge that's actually pointing in the wrong direction. And if I think a research study is going to do that, that's when I will really put the brakes on it and say we can't do this. But as long as the evidence that's being created is going to help the decision maker better than if they had nothing and were just running on intuition, then I'm comfortable pushing forward with that. So we talked about communication, we've talked about mixed method research, and the last piece is of the actual domain expertise. And for domain expertise, I see four main components of behavioral science. I posted this on LinkedIn and I had so many different opinions come. And so this is just Connor Joyce's take, but I believe that applied behavioral science includes choice architecture, which if you've ever heard the book Nudge, that's all about choice architecture. Libertarian paternalism, nudges, choice architecture are all in the same wheelhouse. There's biases and heuristics, which that's going to be the Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman's work. It's encapsulated in the book Thinking Fast and Slow. If you've ever seen those big diagrams with a bunch of different biases and stuff like that, you don't need to know, as an applied behavioral scientist, you don't need to. I've never been quizzed where someone's just like, hey, what's present bias, or what's choice overload, but you should have familiarity with those biases so that you know how to apply them when you're thinking about creating messages or different interventions, etc. The next one is habit formation, and there's been some great books that have been written on. You have like James Clear and the habit loop. You have Nir and the hooked habit model. There's a lot of different takes on habit formation, but one should understand the basics of how do habits form and how do habits break. And then the last piece that I think is really important is social norms, and that's the newest of them all. But it's also the most fast growing because as a field in this domain, people are recognizing that you have to focus on not only the individual but the context and the environment that they're in, and social norms does a great job with that. So to wrap up the individual, I think an applied behavioral scientist again is a good communicator, a mixed methods researcher, and then has domain expertise.